So given how it's very difficult to, say, predict when the sun might be shining during the day, and also because it's very difficult to change human behavior and habits and really our needs and demands that that improve our quality of life, such as being able to turn our lights off when we need to, or turn them on when we want to and need to be able to use our computer when we need to. It's very difficult to change this behavior. And so while there are a lot of arguments in the literature for how such behavior change is going to be a big part, or should be a big part, of how we reduce emissions associated with the electricity grid, I would say that it will and should be part of the answer, but it can only go so far. And that's what we're starting to see in the literature now, and new empirical evidence. And with one of my recent projects is that it really can only reduce electricity consumption by so much. And so without being able to change all of these habits, the solution is really finding a way to provide all electricity in some type of net zero emissions way. And what I mean by that would be, okay, we use as much of that renewable electricity in real time as we can, but we find technologies, or we develop new technologies that also allow us to store that excess energy, such as through these batteries. Batteries can really deal with some of that kind of intraday balancing, but we also need a lot of new innovation and new technologies to allow us to then balance that consumption over longer time periods, say over a few weeks. If you're in some region where there's no sun whatsoever through the winter and the wind is not blowing, you need to be able to say, okay, well, if we generate a lot of power from renewable electricity during one time of the year, one time of the day, how can we find a way to then consume that later? So from my perspective, innovation just has to be a huge part of the picture here. Whereas behavior change will reduce the amount of innovation, or kind of reduce the amount of, say, electricity that we will need to store in order to do that. But given how difficult it is to change behavior, and given how quickly we really do need to reduce emissions in order to address climate change and mitigate the potential consequences in the future, we just need to innovate and make this happen technologically as well. And when I say this, so developing the technology, I have so much faith in being able to innovate, and the pace at which innovation is moving these days is unbelievable. But oftentimes what it comes down to is driving down those costs, which happens in various ways. It can happen with additional innovation by using materials in a different way. It can also largely be around diffusion, so learning by doing and getting these technologies out there. And doing so relies so much on the political and economic aspects as opposed to just the technology itself. So one thing that a common misunderstanding is that a lot of renewable electricity technologies and using them is so much more expensive than using, say, coal or natural gas that we've had forever. But that's simply not true. So over the last 10 years, we've seen the cost of, say, solar come down massively. And in a lot of parts of the world, using these renewable energy technologies and electricity is actually cheaper than the fossil fuels that we've relied on for so long. And so getting kind of through this narrative in politics and kind of in our societal conversations around these issues, it's just really important to know, okay, integrating renewable electricity is it's not more costly, and it also can provide so many other benefits that help drive socioeconomic developments, that it's the integrating these resources is not at odds with that type of development. So the common narrative is usually just that it's too costly and that it's going to increase the price of electricity, but that's simply not true.